Hello there. Welcome to the Bangkok Bareback. I am your host with the most. I don't know my name. I'm just a random guy. Anyway, welcome back. Welcome back to the Bangkok Bareback. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about federations versus unitary states. What's the difference? So many countries around the world are federations. I happen to live in one called the United States. We call ourselves a federal republic. Most countries actually would call themselves a federal republic if they're in a federation. Granted, not all countries, but some would. Now, there are other countries that are unitary states, meaning the central parliament, or Congress, whatever they decide to use, the assembly, in the terms of France, will give certain devolved powers to certain territories or certain areas of their country. They still have to answer to the central parliament, but they have to send representatives to the central government most of the time. There are some cases where it's like the United Kingdom, for instance. They have a union with Jersey, Guernsey, and Isle of Man. Isle of Man, Jersey, Guernsey, their sovereignties under the United Kingdom, but they are separate parliaments, and technically they're separate countries, even though they have the same sovereignty as the British subjects of the United Kingdom, which is fascinating. But the king is the head of state of all four countries. But that's fascinating, right? Then you have so the United Kingdom is a good example of a unitary state with a lot of weird sovereignty in some of their areas in their country. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland have their own parliaments. England does not. So arguably, England doesn't exist as much as Scotland does. Although there is a Church of England that only exists in England, I think. So technically, England exists politically. Like, in terms of the central parliament, there is a Lord Spiritual in the House of Lords that's only integral to the Church of England. So England does exist, but not in the same sense that Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland exist. Those are actual countries compared to England. That being said, I probably just offended all the English people, but that being said, you guys don't have your own devolved parliament that the United Kingdom has given Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. Grant, all those parliaments happened in the last, 30, 20 years? Yeah, whatever. So, arguably, those countries haven't existed before that, although 1707, Scotland did exist as a sovereign, separate country with the same king as England, which is weird, but we're under a personal union. It's kind of like how Canada is to the United Kingdom today. Canada is another perfect example of a federation. Canada and Australia are perfect examples of federations that are very odd. They all started as British colonies that decided to either become provinces or states of a separate federal government, still under the same head of state as the king. Canada didn't achieve true independence until 1867, or not even 1867, actually 1984, I think, or 82, when they signed the Constitution Act of 1982. Canada finally got their full independence from the United Kingdom. But before that, they became a federation, and there were some provinces that didn't want to join. Prince Edward Island didn't want to join for I think 20 or 50 years. So, very tiring. But, you look at some federations, and they started out as just a bunch of random British colonies, and over time they either split apart into different states or they remained the same. And most of them kept the same head of state, like the king. India is another weird example where some Indian states haven't been around for at least 20 years. The Indian states that exist today, some of them do have historic borders, but a lot of them are new that make absolutely no sense. Like, there's one that's just basically what the Portuguese colonized, and that's literally that state. I think it's called Goa, which it has the very low population for a state and a very low territory for a state. But the only reason it exists is because the Portuguese colonized it and didn't relieve its territorial control until 2 years after India's independence. So that's why that state existed. That was the sort of treaty that Portugal and India signed, saying that state will exist from now on. So a lot of these borders don't really make a whole lot of sense. Another crazy, wild example is there's New South Wales is a state in Australia. Now, inside of New South Wales, there's the Capital Territory. completely surrounding New South Wales. But on the other side of the state, or on the coastline, there is the Jervis Bay Territory, which, by the way, only has 300 people on it. New South Wales has 9 million people. And the fact that this thing is next to a state with 9 million people, the Jervis Bay Territory, is fascinating. Who the heck designed this territory? Well, New South Wales had to cede it to the Capital Territory because the Capital Territory wanted a port for their own, I don't know, purposes, I guess. But they still don't really use the port that much. They still use New South Wales, so whatever. 300 people is not going to be enough people to really import anything for the capital anyway. So that's kind of stupid. They might have a train going to it, but who knows. It's a huge nature reserve now, I've heard. And it's very hard for tourists to get in. But it's controlled technically. So the 300 people do vote for the capital representative instead of their own representative, which is weird. So their territory acts more like the capital than a part of New South Wales. But that's fascinating. Some sovereignty goes to the territory, some of it goes to the capital. Very weird, but it's only 300 people, 2 villages. Not a big deal. Imagine if they took over the world. That would be really funny. I've always imagined that in my lifetime. But anyway, you think of France, right? Now, France, I think they only have 2 or 3 autonomous countries, right? They have New Caledonia. I don't know if New Caledonia has a president, but I know for a fact French Polynesia does because I looked them up. But French Polynesia is definitely a separate country, I guess, under the French Republic, which is a unitary state. But I don't know if the Polynesians even send anybody to the French Parliament. I think they have their own parliament. It's so devolved, they just don't even send representatives. That's a good example of how complicated unitary states can be. I think another great example of a unitary state with devolved powers, well, 2 of them actually, that are both kingdoms, would be the Kingdom of Spain and the Kingdom of Denmark. Denmark has 3 autonomous countries. There's Denmark proper, or Denmark metropolitan Denmark. You have the Faroe Islands, that speak Faroese, and then you got Greenland, that speaks Greenlandic. And they're all under the same king. They're under the Danish realm, they call it. And they are unitary states. It's a unitary state itself, but there are 3 autonomous countries under it. So arguably, you could argue it's a federation of 3 countries, but these 2 other countries don't feel as Danish as the Danish proper, obviously. Spain is another good example where there's 17 autonomous zones. And each autonomous zone does have their own language rights. They have their own constitutions. They have their own parliaments. But again, they have to answer to the central parliament of Spain and the king of Spain, who gives parliament their power. And so because of that, these parliaments can technically be dissolved by the central parliament. And any independence movement has to answer to the central parliament. It's a unitary state for that purpose alone. Federations arguably have an easier time seceding from their own countries because theoretically should get more rights. Another great example of a federation that a lot of people find fascinating is called the Russian Federation. Now, arguably they're way more unitary than Spain is because a lot of these Russian states are under direct control of Vladimir Putin or whatever, the president of Russia. In my lifetime, it's going to be Vladimir Putin until he dies, probably in his 80s or 90s, or retires. But for a lot of people, that's all they know. But the president serves for a long period of time, and he actually does directly appoint most of the governors of some of the states in Russia. Russia is very interesting because instead of having 3 major federal types of territory like we have 3 or 4 or 5, I don't know, we have a lot. We technically have 3 with territories, districts, and states. They sort of have 6 major levels of federation. So you see a lot of, the central government controls certain parts of the country more than other parts. St. Petersburg and Moscow are almost the direct control of Vladimir Putin and all his buddies, basically, all oligarchs, basically. Which I do think every country has oligarchs. The answer to the main workers that are really important, like plumbers and electricians, but I would argue that power in a country should be decentralized. And I do think that if we're going to make a global world order, there's some things like human rights that should be above the federal government or above state governments. if we're going to make a world government, I mean, arguably those are confederations. Those are, a country of countries, I guess, right? So, like, the UN would be considered technically having sovereignty. So, technically, it's a country, but it's a country of countries. The European Union is another great example where there's so many European laws that it's starting to equalize what Europe is. Despite the fact that there's 26 different languages or whatever, and, some languages are more common than others. Across Europe, there's pretty much a common currency. Well, except you go to Denmark or Sweden. There's like a common currency. There's a bunch of random stuff. So, like, that's a good example of a confederation, which I probably should have titled this video Confederations, Federations, Unitary States. But a confederation is basically a grouping of countries. The only country nowadays that would be considered a confederation would be Switzerland. But I would argue it's not a confederation because it's very centralized sometimes. It acts more like a country than a country of countries. Although each state is responsible for their language rights and is responsible for their own healthcare system, is responsible for their own drafting of the military. So, arguably, while it's not the most fair system in Switzerland, it's pretty fair, I mean, honestly. Everyone serves in the military pretty much 2 years or 3 years or whatever it is. They're one of the most neutral countries there is out there. They haven't been in war since, I think, 1815. I don't even know, really. But basically, Switzerland is a perfect example of a country that's considered a confederation. Canada, when you join Canada, they call it joining the confederation. That's literally the process of joining Canada. It's called confederation. But you're not a confederation. It's called the federal government in Canada. The national government is called the federal government in Canada. They don't call it the confederal government. But Switzerland's the only one that would call it the confederal government under a central government. So arguably, while I would consider Switzerland a federation, it is more decentralized than the United States. The United States has pretty much a central healthcare system, pretty much has central Social Security. Switzerland is not like that at all. Switzerland, each state is responsible for a lot of their welfare policies. A lot of policies are very, very decentralized to the states. And arguably, I think that makes Switzerland wealthier than the United States. But who knows if that's true or not, but I would like the states to have more autonomy, but I also would like to change the state borders. If that makes any sense. As an American, I don't really like the state borders that much. There's some state borders that I really do like. I like that random hook in Missouri. That's really funny. But that being said, well, I think our states are an absolute mess and should reflect our cultural or at least geographic groupings of people, because cultures can change within multiple states. I would like the states to be more on a geographic basis. Some of them are cut by the Mississippi River, which is fine, I guess. But a lot of them should be divided based on mountain ranges. Mountain ranges aren't going anywhere. So I would do it based on watershed and mountain ranges. I wouldn't be doing it on rivers, which is what our states are based on, rivers and straight lines. Which is stupid, but that's the way they've done it here in the United States. Switzerland is based on the culture of the certain state. In fact, states oftentimes will split apart if they have a different language. For instance, there was a French-speaking state that was part of a German-speaking state in Switzerland. They said, this is wrong, we have our own language, we speak French, not Swiss German. And so the French people said, we're going to split apart. And that's what they did. They split apart from the German state, and they became their own state, Switzerland. That's what we sort of should be doing with some of our states. Some of our states don't make any sense culturally anymore. New Jersey used to be split in two during the colonial period, and guess what? They're united again. East and West Jersey are now united under a single New Jersey again. It should be split up. I mean, there's still a divide between East and West Jersey. North and South Carolina makes sense. They have a separate identity. South Carolina, especially when they started the Civil War. North Carolina wasn't going to start a Civil War. They didn't have the cultural backing that South Carolina did. So you just see that in different places across the United States, where California makes no sense to be one single state. The North is way richer than the South, but the South has more people. South California has way more people than the North. And the governor of California is so big that he can go and meet with other countries across the world. No, he should be under a federal government that should keep him in check so he doesn't meet other world governments. It's against the Constitution to do that. I think you should only have a federal authority go to a separate country. Not the governor of California go to another country. That's weird. But that being said, there's something fundamentally wrong with the United States. When you have Delaware being a single country, and it's very culturally, I guess, unique as Delaware, I guess. And then you have California on the other side of the country is absolutely massive. There's something fundamentally wrong with, I think, our state borders. And the West Coast should be divided up a little bit more. I think a lot of people are pissed off on the West Coast because they're tired of these centralized states that just make laws that these local communities don't care about anymore. Like, what does reading California have to do with the rest of California? Nothing. That they have to answer to the central Californian government anyway. So there's arguably some of our state borders need to change, and some of our federal laws should be going back to the states. But arguably the local governments should be more in charge than our state governments. A lot of these states don't make any sense. I mean, I don't know. I've lived in states that it's interesting to me when I find about local and national governments too. So I was living in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts at the time. And I found out that there's a mayor in my town. In the town of whatever it is. The town of North Andover, doesn't matter, right? I found out there's a mayor. Right? It's called a town. Now, down in the South where I live now, they have an executive council for the county level. There is no towns in Maryland for the most part. They're all under executive councils. There's no mayors. Everything is centralized to the county level, not the town level. So all the school districts are under the county, not under the town, which is fascinating to me. That the South is technically more centralized in the power of their county than the North is with their towns. Which I think the North, the reason why they're so wealthier, because the towns might have more powers to do things. Although they do make up crazy laws. There's some towns where, they don't want you building there and they give you high fees. So arguably, I don't know. Who's abusing their power more? Is it the county or is it the town? Who would you rather want abusing their power more? A local town or a county? That's up to you. If you're a global investor, I guess you would want a county level. But if you're you're just a family man and you're not like a global capitalist, you probably want to answer to the town more than the centralized county. So it's just a very, very interesting thing how different states even organize their own counties. I didn't even know what county I was living in Andover. I just knew I was living in Andover. And there was 2 stupid representatives for the same town, which is dumb, but yeah, whatever. There are 2, what do they call it, congressional representatives. So every time they drew the line, they drew it over my home. So it changed every 2 or 3 years. Freaking terrible. But that's what they used to do in Massachusetts, so they can get more votes for their Democratic Party, or whatever party they were running. They could get more votes in that certain congressional district. So it's just fascinating. Massachusetts is a fascinating state, and so is Maryland. And looking at their governments, I now understand how certain states are organized because of it. California does most things, I think, on a county level. Like, I know they have AGs for their county level, attorney generals for county level. But some of the attorney generals suck really bad, and probably, arguably, the city should be in charge of it. But whatever. So, I know Alameda County, for instance, they have an AG, but I think Alameda itself has its own public school district. So, some things are actually devolved for the school districts, and some things are devolved to criminal law, which I find fascinating. And again, I'm talking about my own country, the United States. There's a lot of weird things that go on even in the states, and I could barely comprehend it. I'm not like a government guy or anything, but I do love to look at government structure. I get confused by it sometimes. I have all these constitutions in my room. Talks about certain laws of certain countries around the world. The United Kingdom talks about the Chain Act of 1707. In France, they talk about the 3 Supreme Courts. They have 3 Supreme Courts. They have a constitutional court, they have like a high criminal court, and a high civil court, I think. Or something like that. Like, France is weird. And France will the president appoints 3 guys, the Senate supports 3 guys, and the representatives appoints 3 guys, for the congressional, for the constitutional court. And they're like rotated out, I think. So that's kind of cool. They really do believe in their term limits over in France. They take that really seriously. And the president never serves for life over there. They always make sure the president's rotated every 5 to 10 years, which, again, he serves a longer term, so I guess he can get things done. And it's interesting because if the prime minister's from a different party, the president's more powerful, but the prime minister's from the same party, the president gets way less power. So they make party politics like a really big thing in France. Meanwhile, in the United States, we didn't want to make party politics important, but it is now. But when George Washington was president, he said, I don't want to have political parties. Guess what we're divided by? Political party. Makes total sense, honestly. I don't know. But, yeah. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode, me talking about federations versus unitary states. How unitary states use their central government to give parliaments devolved parliaments to other smaller states within their unitary state. It's just quite interesting. Oh, I forgot to talk about the biggest federation and unitary state. Let me just talk about that real quick. So, in China, they're a unitary state, but arguably there are 4 or 3 parliaments, depending on who you ask. They have Taiwan, which is a rebellious province of the People's Republic of China, but Taiwan has provinces inside of it, so that's kind of stupid. Then you got Hong Kong and Macau, which were European colonies that still want to retain their Europeanness, which is weird. And you got China. China will eventually dissolve the parliaments of Hong Kong and Macau because they've signed the 50-year deals. So, by 2047 and 2049, respectively, for those states in China, those autonomous zones will be absorbed back into the People's Republic of China, or at least China proper, because People's Republic never actually ever controlled those city-states until the 1990s, I think. So, yeah, that's very strange, but basically China's a unitary state with the devolved powers again, just like we talked about with the United Kingdom when they give Scotland their devolved powers. So again, unitary states form parliaments from their central government, sort of, but sometimes they're formed from different countries, like in the United Kingdom. Federations will often join together. There are multiple countries that join together in one country, most of the time. That's not always the case. Sometimes the federation is joined by multiple British colonies, like in Malaysia, or Australia, or Canada, or sometimes they just give devolved powers to people. Let's see, New Zealand, again, has two states under them, I think, Nauru and, I forgot the other, Cook Islands are New Zealand territories. They give dissolved powers to them. Even though they're under New Zealand, and they're technically separate countries under free association, their sovereignties under New Zealand. It's very debatable whether they're territories or countries. I don't really know. But it confuses the heck out of me, but the world recognizes them technically as countries, I guess, at least under the Olympics. I don't know about... The Olympics sounds about official, right? If you're a local government and you're representing the Olympics, that's fine. So anyway, you are someone and I'm someone else talking about the Bangkok Bareback Federation versus Unitary State. Goodbye.